Coming up on The World Today. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson halts plans to ease restrictions in England due to on Saturday. Hong Kong government postpones parliamentary elections by 1 year, citing concerns over a rise in coronavirus infections. Plus, Muslims around the world mark the first day of Eid al-Adha amid COVID-19 pandemic. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. The World Health Organization says the coronavirus pandemic is a once-in-a-century health crisis whose effects will be felt for decades to come. Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus issued a stark warning at a meeting of the WHO's Emergency Committee, which declared the global health crisis 6 months ago. The pandemic has already killed more than 670,000 people since the first cases of the disease were detected in Wuhan, China late last year.
The pandemic is a once-in-a-century health crisis, the effects of which will be felt for decades to come. Many scientific questions have been resolved. Many remain to be answered. Early results from serology studies are painting a consistent picture. Most of the world's people remain susceptible to this virus, even in areas that have experienced severe outbreaks. Many countries that believed they were past the worst are now grappling with new outbreaks. Some that were less affected in the earliest weeks are now seeing escalating numbers of cases and deaths. And some that had large outbreaks have brought them under control. Although vaccine development is happening at record speed, we must learn to live with this virus, and we must fight it with the tools we have.
The further easing of coronavirus restrictions in England due to this coming weekend has reported postponed for at least 2 weeks amid an increase in coronavirus cases. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says progress against coronavirus continues with the daily and weekly number of deaths falling, but warns that some European countries are struggling to control it and the UK must be ready to react. Here's more on this and other stories in our update.
Cannot be complacent, and I won't stand by and allow this virus to threaten to cause more pain and more heartache in our country. So that's why last night the Health Secretary announced new restrictions on household contact in the northwest, specifically Greater Manchester and in parts of East Lancashire and West Yorkshire. Our plan to reopen the society and the economy is conditional, that it relies on continued progress against the virus. With those numbers creeping up, our assessment is that we should now squeeze that brake pedal in order to keep the virus under control. On Saturday, the 1st of August, you'll remember we had hoped to reopen in England a number of the higher risk settings that had remained closed. And today, I'm afraid we're postponing those changes for at least a fortnight. That means until the 15th of August at the earliest, casinos, bowling alleys, skating rinks and the remaining close contact services must remain closed. Indoor performances will not resume. Pilots of larger crowds in sports venues and conference centres will not take place, and wedding receptions of up to 30 people will not be permitted, but ceremonies, of course, can continue to take place in line with COVID-secure guidelines.
Vietnam has recorded its first COVID-19 fatality in a devastating blow for a country proud of its 0 deaths. The 70-year-old man was from the central city of Hoi An, the state media announced today. Here's more on this and other stories in our COVID-19 Global Update.
Japan says it recorded at least 1,305 new coronavirus cases, a record daily increase for the second consecutive day. Tokyo's governor has said a state of emergency may need to be declared in the Japanese capital if cases continue to rise. Vietnam reported 45 new coronavirus infections in the city of Da Nang. the single biggest rise in cases since the start of its outbreak. It has also confirmed the first death from the virus. The country had had extraordinary success in keeping the virus out after shutting its borders early and imposing strict quarantine and contact tracing. But a new outbreak in Da Nang, a tourist city on the central coast, has caused alarm, as the origin has not yet been identified. The president of the Philippines has extended lockdown restrictions in the capital Manila, saying they will remain in place until mid-August. President Rodrigo Duterte made the announcement in a televised address that was pre-recorded and released on Friday. He is also promising free vaccines if they became available, prioritizing first the poor and then the middle class, police and military personnel. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has said he was taking antibiotics to deal with an infection that left him feeling weak, chuckling in an online video about a mold in his lungs after he left isolation due to a coronavirus infection. The president tested positive for coronavirus on July the 7th, but has since been given the all clear. However, his wife, First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro, has tested positive for the virus.
Muslims in many countries around the world have started celebrating Eid al-Adha, the annual festival of sacrifice. It marks the 12th and last month of the Muslim lunar calendar. The event also marks the end of Hajj, a 5-day pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia's holy city of Mecca.
The Eid prayer performed by Muslim worshippers across the world kicks off the first day of the annual festival. In Istanbul, thousands gathered in Hagia Sophia Mosque in the early hours of Friday morning to attend Eid prayers for the first time since the iconic building's reconversion into a mosque. In Indonesia, home to the world's largest population of Muslims, people were allowed to attend Eid prayers in mosques under strict health guidelines, including bringing their own prayer mats and praying several feet apart from one another. Worshippers were told to wear masks and are to refrain from shaking hands or hugging. Authorities in Indonesia also ordered that meat be delivered door to door to the poor to avoid long lines. An important part of the 4-day Eid al-Adha, or Feast of Sacrifice, is when Muslims slaughter livestock and distribute the meat to the poor. In Jordan, where the kingdom has largely controlled the virus, worshippers gathered wearing masks to observe the prayers and celebrations that followed. But Iraq, Syria and Egypt mosques were closed and the streets were empty of the usual Eid crowds. In Afghanistan, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani attended Eid al-Adha prayers at the presidential palace. Outside the palace, Kabul residents gathered at a livestock market to mark the day, sacrificing animals and hoping for peace and security in the country. Muslims took part in the first day of the symbolic stoning of the devil ritual, taking turns as security guards enforced social distancing. Last year, some 2.5 million people took part in the Hajj pilgrimage. This year, as few as 1,000 pilgrims already residing in Saudi Arabia were allowed to perform the Hajj. The Saudi Health Ministry said there have been no cases of the COVID-19 illness among this year's pilgrims after a scaled-down Hajj.
The Hong Kong government has postponed September's parliamentary elections by 1 year, saying it's necessary amid a rise in coronavirus infections. Hong Kong is currently experiencing a spike in COVID-19 infections and reported 121 new cases today. However, the opposition has accused the government of using the pandemic as a pretext to stop people from voting. On Thursday, the government banned 12 pro-democracy candidates from running in the elections. And in the United States, President Donald Trump has whipped up political opposition within his own party to his controversial suggestion of a delay to November's presidential election. In a tweet on Thursday, Trump suggests the idea of postponing the polls over concerns about mail-in voting during the coronavirus pandemic. He suggested that increased postal voting during the pandemic could lead to fraud and inaccurate results. For the suggestion of a delay, Trump was rebuked by senior members of the Republican Party, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy both dismissing the idea. The president does not have the authority to postpone the election, as any delay would have to be approved by Congress. Meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the U.S. top infectious disease expert, is testifying before a coronavirus subcommittee in Congress weeks after President Donald Trump's administration first refused to let him address the panel. Fauci's testimony comes at the end of the week when the pandemic's tragic toll on the country has become far clearer. According to official data, U.S. records a coronavirus death toll every 5 minutes, and it tops 150,000. The United States on Wednesday experienced its 150,000 deaths from the disease, more than any other country. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Maria Bird, joins us now for more on the situation in the United States. Maria, welcome to the program. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Maria, can you tell us more about Dr. Anthony Fauci appearing before a coronavirus subcommittee in Congress today?
Well, as we know, it's very serious times here in the U.S. As I think many expected the pandemic to definitely be at a place where it would have been flatlining at this time. But as we know, it has not necessarily flatlined, and we're seeing spikes across the country. And so obviously there are many in the Senate, specifically Republicans, that are questioning whether or not what Dr. Fauci is saying is of danger is really requiring that the U.S. Forcefully shut down once again. And so, as we've seen, it's just 22 minutes ago, there was discussions between him and Congressman Jordan. And he said he's not in a position, Fauci says, to determine what the government can or cannot do forcefully. But he's just laying out the dangers of what is happening with the coronavirus and the dangers of not following social distancing and wearing a mask policies.
So this all comes just weeks after President Donald Trump's administration first refused to let him address the panel. And the president's been criticized for his response to the pandemic, with many saying that he didn't act on time. So depending on how today's hearing goes, what happens next and what implications does it have?
Well, depending on how today's hearing goes, this will really depend on how Congress will decide to respond moving forward. Will Congress put forth bills that potentially could put in line some forceful actions on behalf of the government and kind of putting President Trump in a position where he has to sign more federal legislation to address what is believed to potentially could help to curb the coronavirus pandemic. This will also address areas like reopening schools. We know that many districts are back and forth and are very unclear as to what they should do as it relates to opening schools. And so this will allow for some more clear, I think the Congress is now saying, listen, we will take on some of what we believe the president should take on as putting forth federal legislation to address the pandemic.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit here and look at the U.S. elections now. Yesterday, President Trump denied he wanted to postpone the election, but argued that mass postal voting would leave the results in doubt. Republicans have rejected that suggestion, but amid this COVID-19 pandemic that has hit the country so hard, what does the average American even want?
The average American would not want to see polls not opening on November the 3rd. The average American, I think, is very much ready. Now, you could have some that are very much in support of President Trump that would support those ideas that he has. But the average American wants to be able to get to the polls, and whether or not the ballot box is in their mailbox or the ballot box in an actual polling location, they want to be able to vote come November.
All right. Well, Maria, thank you so much for giving us some clarity on that. Stay safe.
Thank you.
After the break, we meet Italy's oldest student surviving World War II and a pandemic to graduate at 96. Stay with us. Thanks so much for staying with us. Sizzling temperatures are hitting various regions around France today, and Parisians are keeping cool with ice cream and bottled water. In recent days, temperatures have been soaring above 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit in places, adding extreme heat to the health warnings of a continent already taking new measures to rein in a potential second wave of coronavirus infections. While some Parisians said they tried to wear masks whenever possible, the heat has been unbearable, making it difficult to wear their mask. France gave local governments the power to mandate face masks in outdoor public spaces as the country fights a resurgence of COVID-19. The northern city of Lille will impose such a mandate from Monday, August 3rd. The 7-day average of new infections this week has passed 1,000 per day for the first time since the first half of May, when France began lifting a nationwide lockdown. In Zimbabwe, opposition movement for democratic change spokeswoman Fadzai Mahir said she had been arrested following a protest in Harare. She shared this via a video posted online. During the live video, Mahir can be heard saying, "Riot police have arrived at Bridge Spa where we've just been arrested. We're going live. They are coming," as police advanced towards her and told her to stop recording them. She later could not be reached for comment. Businesses were shut and streets deserted in the country's two main cities as security forces patrolled to prevent anti-government protests. President Mnangagwa critics say his government is resorting to the authoritarian tactics of the Robert Mugabe era of banning demonstrations and abducting and arresting opponents. Despite this, police spokesman Paul Nyati said the security situation in the country is calm and peaceful. Meanwhile, Mnangagwa has said that the protests continue to constitute an insurrection by the opposition. Meanwhile, in neighboring South Africa, Zimbabweans in the country have protested at the Zimbabwean consulate in Johannesburg. Tensions have been rising in Zimbabwe after opposition groups called for the protests to denounce allegations of corruption in government.
In solidarity of our fellow citizens in Zimbabwe that are demonstrating over Mnangagwa's misrule. We are here to show them that we stand with them because the reason why we are here in South Africa as economic refugees is because ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa have failed to rule. They have failed to govern the country. Zimbabweans are scattered all over the world. As Zimbabweans here in South Africa, we are not happy. We want to come back home. Stop corruption, stop looting, stop police brutality, stop abducting people. We want ZANU-PF to go.
Zimbabwe's collapse. How come, where did you see a country 95% unemployed? Then you expect that country, people to just keep quiet. Check now, every Zimbabwean is all over diaspora, wherever we are now. That's why South African citizens, they are after us Zimbabweans because we are overcrowded here in South Africa. So my message to you and to Mr. Ramaphosa and Southern countries leaders, just fix Zimbabwe.
Sam Rawit, an Eritrean refugee, was taken by human traffickers and held captive for nearly 2 years in Libya. She survived horrific sexual violence and sexual abuse. Now, with help from UN Refugee Agency, she has been evacuated to Rwanda, where she is receiving psychological care to help her heal from her trauma.
For Sam Rawit's protection, her real identity won't be revealed. She was just 18 years old when she was abducted by human traffickers who took her to Libya in 2018. With no family left in her country, Sam Rawit felt threatened, and facing the likelihood of forced recruitment into the military, she decided to flee Eritrea. On her search for safety, she was taken by human traffickers to a town in Sudan near the border with Libya.
When I remember that moment, I feel terrible. First, they took us by force on our way to the market. Then they told us that we're going to Libya. Second, they raped us and threatened us with knives and guns.
Samrawit was held for 2 months in a traffickers' camp in Kufra in southeast Libya, where her captors initially demanded $6,000 for her freedom. She was bought and sold by different groups of traffickers and smugglers and held captive for 2 years, enduring torture, extortion, sexual abuse. With help from the UN Refugee Agency, Samrawit was evacuated to Rwanda last October alongside other refugees who had been in Libya. Samrawit and other survivors also received psychosocial support to help them heal from the trauma.
I get very stressed sometimes because of everything I have been through. At the time, I felt bad. I am relieved because I didn't get pregnant or get a sexually transmitted disease.
More than 250 people rescued from Libya live in the Gashora Transit Center on the outskirts of the capital, Kigali. Most come from Eritrea, Somalia and Sudan and have been given asylum seeker status. They are given shelter, food, water and medical care. She and other survivors also receive counseling. Samrawit is focusing on her healing and has taken up English classes.
I am attending English language classes and they have asked me if I want to learn another skill like sewing. I am very happy and grateful. We have come from darkness to light.
The UN agency and other partners are calling on countries to protect refugees and migrants traveling via routes controlled by human traffickers and to hold those responsible to account.
Let's meet 96-year-old Giuseppe Paterno, Italy's oldest student. He survived World War II, the coronavirus pandemic, and has just become one of the world's oldest graduates after finishing his history and philosophy degree from the University of Palermo. Born in 1923, Paterno grew up in a poor family in Sicily, and despite his love of books and studying, he was unable to go to university as a young man. Not letting his old age stop him, he enrolled in the University of Palermo to take a degree in history and philosophy in his 90s, saying to himself it was now or never. 3 years of rigorous studying and a global pandemic later, he was awarded with a standing ovation by his fellow students, teachers, and family as he slowly shuffled to collect his certificate in the university's main hall. Despite being more than 70 years older than his classmates, he managed to achieve the highest grade possible, a degree with top honors, the highest mark in his class. Looking to the future, he plans to devote himself to writing and wants to revisit all the texts he didn't have a chance to further explore. That's his goal. Well, that is definitely beautiful to see. That's all for the world today. I'm Akaite Afia. Stay safe and have a great weekend.